Hello, it's me again. More books for you, what a surprise. First one, Jane Caro's Lyrebird. Imagine, if you will, a slightly hungover PhD student out watching some birds up on the Burgher Swamp in New South Wales. And she's specifically looking for a lyrebird, hence title of book. And at some point hears the lyrebird run through its courtship ritual of all the wonderful sounds. As we know, the lyrebird mimics, really very well. I was about to say exclusively well. What I mean is exceptionally well. And during this sort of auditory display, we hear, she hears the lyrebird imitate a woman screaming "help, help, help" in Spanish. And being slightly hungover, our young woman, Jessica Walton, kind of realization only comes to her, like, if it mimics a sound of someone in great distress, then it must have heard that somewhere. And she instantly surmises it must have happened in that spot, and it must have been something dreadful, and she takes this story to the police. Now, this all happened 20 years ago. Nothing comes of that. She makes friends, or makes contact with, and then eventually we learn friendship with a young police officer, Megan Blaxland, and nothing comes of this. There's no body, they can't find anything, etc., etc. Fast forward to now, 20 years later, and a body has been found. And it has been, through the identification process, we get a whole story about young women that went missing 20 years ago, who might have been Spanish speakers, therefore possibly Filipinos, and that leads us straight into a very complex story of identification, who these young women from the Philippines might have been, and how they came to Australia, were they trafficked in, and what was their story, who might have been murdering. And we have this, and this is where I think Caro is splendid. We have a cast which has someone from almost every walk of life, including a trans brothel madam, an on-the-run young woman who is self-made, some very rich people who had Filipino nannies, and we have, who I very much enjoyed, not just the sort of the procedural dynamics, but between the different members of Megan Blaxland and her co-workers, who are not always in a great place, and particularly her younger co-worker, Samira, who's one of the loveliest characters, who's obviously steeling herself for a very early career investigation into something that's quite seedy, and is also confronting, and this is where I think Caro's novel kind of rises up to a higher level of interest, at least for me, and that is personal, in bushfire, and what it feels like to be someone who's put into a situation where you're a bit terrified of fire, haven't grown up managing it or not managing it, and how at a particular moment you may have to overcome that, or you may have to be wise about it, and etc. There's a glorious cast. There's a very strong sex trafficking theme, and remember, we are talking about sex trafficking in the 20s, which had a different sort of social vocabulary, but the facts are still quite need to be uncovered, and are fascinating stories. Who is the murdered women? Are there more? And how are we looking at places like the Burgher Swamp, which might be worthy of preservation in its own right, and why don't we? Why can we not manage to see that there are landscapes that should remain unspoiled? I don't know, but that at least something should be done to preserve them. It's a fabulous, page-turning crime novel that I very, very much enjoyed and do highly recommend. Second one up is Marion Taffe's By Her Hand. Again, a novel that I sort of only later identified sort of the political threads, and I think it's, you know, it's a historical novel. It's set in 10th century Kingdom of Mercia, which is the way the United Kingdom or Britain was kind of divided up into separate little kingdoms or tribal zones. And it's basically the story of invaders and boundaries and power that's given to women. So By Her Hand is, I think that even the title of the book's quite brilliant. But, you know, at the end of this book, I was sitting there saying, you know, it makes you want to take up both the pen and the sword. And I think this is what Taffe looks at with her main character, who's a 12-year-old Frida, who enjoys the idea of words, but she is a woman living in this, in the 10th century, where maybe access to words might have been for a privileged few of women, not no women altogether, because in some ways earlier eras in history seem to have been more, centuries in history seem to have been more liberal. There were women working in scriptoriums, and it was not completely unknown. But this young Frida witnesses her own home being invaded. She witnesses her unloving father, and there's a very deep, complex family history going on there, disappear off to fight for his local lord. And there are some scenes of, you know, the rape and pillage that will go with sort of your invading Danes or... and Frida ends up, through this sort of self-interested bishop, in a cloistered community, where she finds solace with nuns, where she finds friendship, and where she finds a reason, not just a reason to exist, but also a reason, the reason for why she loves these words. And she is trained at the due to the politicking, if you like, and the self-interest of a bishop in developing her hand. I think it was one of those very detailed, very rich historical novels that just nailed the whole tapestry of the story so perfectly onto the page, or into my mind. It was very rich, very detailed. Frida is someone who both uses words and eventually the sword to go after, find out where her father has gone to, try and find out her family history, but also to change the course of power, because she comes under the comes to the notice of and then the protection of a very powerful lady who is becomes. They change each other's lives through words, and this is again very much part of her Taffe's story, is how words, what the power of words is. So there's a reason to keep writing, everyone who's out there trying to do it. Again, the politics, there are the politics, you know, what the word can do. The last one up, the third one, is I have to find it now. Oh my gosh, Karen Russell's The Antidote. An American writer wrote a Pulitzer finalist in about 2012 called Swamplandia. The Antidote is a marvellous, rich, wacky, unsettling, filmically weird and wonderful, but also it keeps you in a specific, and this is what I found interesting, it keeps us in a specific time zone in America, where there's great poverty. We're in the 1930s, and then a famous, historically accurate, so we've embedded this story in a historical event. We're in a small town in the Dust Bowl, and there's a dust storm, and we start our story with an array of characters. The most probably outrageous, if you like, or the one that kind of grabbed my attention first, was the Prairie Witch. She's called the Antidote. Her real name is Angelina. And these prairie witches are a figment of Russell's imagination, but serve a kind of, as a literary device, serve a purpose. And within the story, serve the purpose of collecting all the secrets from from the people who want to either unburden themselves or put them into the safekeeping of a vault. So these are living vessels for secrets, and they can be like a bank. They can be exchanged at any time, or they can be withdrawn. The dust storm happens, and there are effects. One is that all the vaults, and there are several, find they have lost all their credit, if you like. All the secrets are gone. So that happens to our main character, we open up with her being in jail, in captive to a very unpleasant, rather monstrous sheriff. We have a young, well, I won't go to her first. We have a Polish origin farmer who's, they've come up hard. It's been a hard life. They've been toiling on the land, and the land is giving them nothing, and everybody's harvest has been destroyed except for his. And he seems to have this cocoon of protection. He has a niece who's an orphan, missing her mother, but her whole life is this kind of insane basketball mania that keeps her rhythm to life going, and it keeps her friendships going, and they play these series competitions in the most unbelievable conditions, training in unbelievable conditions. It's quite wild, but she's a feisty young woman, and eventually she and the Vault kind of get together to make a sort of a way through the mess of things. There are main characters, and then a young photographer, part of the New Deal photography, which is where photographers had to go into the regions and photograph the impoverished, the struggling farmers who were the backbone of society. And she's a young black woman. She finds her camera is smashed up she loses her first camera and finds a camera in, most unlikely, in a shop, and it turns out to be a quantum camera. That is, it photographs what she thinks she's seeing, photographs other things. Is it the past? Is it the future? What Russell is actually looking at, and it's a book that you go into where you're afraid to miss a word because her writing is that good, but you also can't afford to miss a word because everything matters. Every sentence matters. Basically, I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but basically we are looking at land and who owns it and who's been displaced from it. And this is obviously hugely topical. We are looking at the dispossession of the Native American Indians. We are looking, therefore, at the dispossession of other peoples in the world who are subject to white interest, like Israel, Palestine, and how the white settling is something that is shameful and horrible and has to be put inside one of these vaults. And also an understanding, because it's not a simple black and white, there's an understanding of how a settler might come to a country because where they've come from is quite horrendous, and what is their thinking about how they justify what they do when they get there, who's going to survive. So it's a book about survival, but it's also a book about hope. And it's a book that makes you laugh, you kind of, stretch your eyes and go, my goodness, where did she come up with these ideas? Fabulous, fabulous writing. I think it's a standout novel, and I think it's a novel that you go into knowing that you're not reading something that is throwaway, or I can't even call it light-hearted, but there are lots of moments in it where the imagination carries us through and the hope carries us through, because there's a murder thread, there is a historical thread of, the illegitimate unwed mothers. There are so many elements crammed into this that it hops off the page into a kind of world that, sort of, it plays out in front of you. At least that's the way my mind works. I'm not saying yours does, but I saw this as a whole, complete, three-dimensional experience, and I'm grateful for it. I thought it was a great book, really great book. So there you are, 3. Lucky you. That's it for now. I have waffled on enough. There will be more. If you like this video, you can think of actually saying that you like it and maybe even subscribe should the thought occur to you. That is all I have for you. Until next time. Bye-bye.